it's Annie, welcome back to BloomTV. Today I am going to do my February 2015 reading wrap-up, and in total I read 21 or 22 books this month, which is amazing considering it's one of the shortest months of the year, well, is the shortest month of the year, but that also means that this is going to be a really long wrap-up, so I would get a snack or a cup of tea or coffee or whatever beverage you drink and sit down and watch it. And I did try filming this once before and it was 30 minutes long, so I'm refilming this and I hope it's not going to be too long, but if it is, be prepared. So I'm just going to go quite quickly because of that, and not really give many synopsises because I have so many books to get through, and most of these I have done written or video reviews for. So the first couple of books I read this month were from the library, and the first one was Love, Lies and Lemon Pies by Katie Cannon, which is kind of a YA British novel, kind of a contemporary, and it's kind of just got that Great British Bake Off feel. It's about a boy and a girl who are basically forced to join this bake club that happens at their school, and it was really cute, and I just gave it 3 stars because it wasn't anything special, but I did enjoy it and I thought it was really sweet and I loved the baking aspect to it. And then the next book I read was probably one of my favourites of the month, and it is The Hours by Michael Cunningham. This won the Pulitzer in, I believe, 1999, and it focuses on 3 women, and all 3 of these women, their storylines kind of revolve around the novel Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. So one of the point of views is from Virginia Woolf whilst she's writing Mrs. Dalloway. The second is from a housewife whose favourite book is Mrs. Dalloway in 1950s LA, kind of suburbia. And the final one is about a woman who's kind of the modern reincarnation of Mrs. Dalloway in the 90s in New York, I believe, in like Brooklyn or Manhattan. In one of those suburbs, and it's just a really beautifully written book. I loved the writing style is gorgeous, and it just deals with topics of like depression and life and love and suicide really well, and it writes about them really beautifully. And there's also some LGBTQ aspects in this book, but this has a really heavy trigger warning for suicide, so if that's something that affects you, then I would really highly recommend you avoid this book. And I'm trying to say that's not a spoiler, but there is numerous times when characters attempt to commit suicide in this book, so if that's something that affects you, then I would avoid this. But if that doesn't affect you, then I'd really highly suggest you read this if you haven't already, because it's amazing, and I really want to watch the film because it's got Meryl Streep in it. And the next book I read from the library was The Language of Flowers by Vanessa Diffenbaugh, and this is about a girl called Victoria who's had a really troubled childhood. She was adopted, well, she was put into adoption right when she was a baby, and has never really found a home, and this follows dual perspective, dual timelines, one when she's at her first ever home that she's really enjoyed living in, and secondly when she's 18 and she's just been kicked out of her last home and she's now homeless but finds a job working in a florist, and she is very knowledgeable on the language of flowers, which stems from the Victorian era. And it's about that, and it's about love and kind of humanity. Victoria's a really interesting character. She's really complex and really interesting. I feel like you don't see a lot of characters like her in fiction in general. I just thought she was really interesting and I really liked her. I am very different to how she is, because she's been very kind of traumatised by events that have happened to her, and they've kind of made her who she is, and I've really luckily never had to go through the things that she has had to go through, but it was an amazing book. I'd really recommend it, and I gave it 4 stars. And then the next book I read from the library was one which was a slight disappointment for me, and that is Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore by Robin Sloan. I've written a full review on this, so I'm not going to say too much about it other than I was really disappointed. I think the hype of this, so many people love this book on BookTube, and I just kind of felt a bit meh about it, and I gave it 3.5. But if you want to know more, then check out my Goodreads, and I posted a full review explaining why I felt that way on my Goodreads page. And then the next book I read from the library was Between the Lines by Tamara Webber. This is the ugly American cover. I love Tamara Webber's book entitled Easy. It is probably my favourite romance novel of all time. And I was kind of expecting good things from this, but I hadn't really heard amazing things about it, so I didn't have really high expectations, and it was just a kind of meh book for me. was just a romance novel really, and I didn't really feel like there was anything else to it. So I only gave it 3 stars, and it's also part of a series. I'm not sure if I'll continue with the rest of them, but I don't really mind too much as I didn't have really high expectations for it. And then the next one I read was Hold Your Own by Kate Tempest. This is a poetry collection, and it's kind of like an epic poem following the prophet Tiresias. Or kind of Kate Tempest's reincarnation of the prophet Tiresias and his story. I found this really interesting. I gave it 4 stars. I love Kate Tempest as a spoken word poet and as a written poet. I think her work is amazing and her use of rhythm is amazing. I've really never come across anyone else like her, and she's amazing. This wasn't my favourite. I think I prefer listening to her stuff instead of reading it. So if you can get this on audiobook, then I'd highly recommend listening to it on audiobook, even though I haven't listened to it, because I think it would be a lot better on audiobook. But I still enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Of course, there's some poems I didn't enjoy quite as much, but there were some that I really, really loved. And it deals with a lot of issues like not social standing, but class differences and gender inequality or class inequality and loads of different things. And I thought it was really interesting and a really well done kind of retelling of a classic kind of mythology. And then the last book I read from the library was a graphic novel, actually a non-fiction one, and it was Sally Heathcote Suffragette. This is by Mary M. Talbot, Kate Charlesworth and Brian Talbot, and I had quite high expectations for this. I've heard a lot of really good things about it, but I'm really glad I didn't actually buy this in the end, because this is quite expensive. It's like just under £20 I think in the UK, or like £17, which is quite a lot of money for me to spend on a graphic novel. But I'm so glad I got this from the library, because I didn't really end up enjoying it. I only gave it 3 stars. I really like the art. Because this was a non-fiction graphic novel, it's about the suffragette movement, as the title would suggest, and I feel like they had all these different events which the graphic novel detailed, but nothing ever kind of connected the plot wasn't well structured for me. So I was slightly disappointed, but the art is really beautiful. I mean, it's very classic kind of comic book. It's nothing really, really special, but it is well done, and I liked the art, but that was really the only thing. And I liked learning more about the movement, but I feel that it wasn't well done in a graphic kind of novel format, because it didn't flow very well as a story. So those are all the library books I read. And then the first physical book of my own that I read this month was The Princess Bride by William Goldman. I've already done a review on this. I had quite mixed feelings about it, but overall I think I gave it a 3.75 or a 3.5 stars. But on Goodreads I gave it a 4, I believe. But if you want to see what I thought more in depth on this book, then you can go watch my non-spoiler review that I did of this. Yeah, I did have mixed feelings about it. Some parts I enjoyed and some parts I didn't. But you can watch my review to find out more. And then the next book I read, I also have done a full non-spoiler review on, and it is I Was Here by Gail Forman. This was released at the end of January. I was really excited for this one. Again, I was a bit disappointed, which is a shame, because I still do love Gail Forman as an author. This is about a girl whose best friend commits suicide, so there is strong trigger warnings for suicide for this book. And she is really upset, understandably, by this, and kind of very confused. She didn't know anything at all about her friend, or if she had kind of depression, and it all comes as very much of a shock to her. And it's kind of about her going through the stages of grief and understanding about why her friend did commit suicide. And it was just really interesting, but you can see more of my thoughts in my non-spoiler review, because I go kind of more into depth about why I was disappointed with it there. And then the next book I read was Grave Mercy by Robin LaFeathers. This was probably, along with The Hours, my other favourite book of the month. I really love this. I can't believe I've been waiting so long to read this. I just kept putting it off. So I brought this like last November or December. And this is a historical novel set in, 15th century France, Brittany, and it is about this girl called Ismay, and when she's just about to be married off right at the beginning of the novel, and then is rescued by this man, and she is sent to this kind of convent where she is taught how to be an assassin/spy. It's really fabulous. The writing is really well done. It's really fast-paced. It did take me a bit of time to get into, but once I kind of got to the 100-page mark and kind of was familiarised with everything, because this is set over 500 years ago, I kind of really flew through it, and I just really enjoyed Ismay as a character. The romance is really well done in this book. If you want a book which has a really well done romance, I'd highly recommend this one. And Ismay was a really excellent character. She definitely had her flaws, but at the same time she was really strong, and I really liked her. I thought she was a really great character, and I just loved it, and I can't wait to continue on with the rest of the series, because I hear they only get better, and I think it's kind of a companion series that follows the same storyline arc. I don't like complain if I'm wrong, that's how I understand how it works. So I'm looking forward to reading the second and third books. And the next book I read was For Darkness Shows the Stars by Diana Peterfreund. This is a post-apocalyptic / sci-fi retelling of Persuasion by Jane Austen. I love Jane Austen, probably a lot of you know that already, so I was really excited to pick this up, and it didn't disappoint me. I gave this a 4 stars on GOODREADS. It was really lovely. I loved the characters. I thought they were really well done and really complex and well developed. Persuasion, because I read Persuasion, the last time I read Persuasion was like 3 years ago, so I can't remember exactly how kind of well done the plot was, and how exact it was from kind of following Persuasion's example, but I did really enjoy this. I thought the characters were well done, as I'd already said. The setting was really original and new, which I like. This is actually kind of set in a New Zealand, which I didn't know until I read the end. I just kind of assumed it was an island somewhere, but the author actually states that it is New Zealand, and I thought that was really interesting. I've never been, but it's somewhere I'd really like to visit, so that was really interesting. I just overall enjoyed this, and this is the first in a duology, so I will definitely be picking up the second one, which I believe is a retelling of The Scarlet Pimpernel, which I haven't read, but I will look forward to reading that. And then the next book I read is it's a trade paperback of a kind of comic book series, and it is The Wicked and the Divine Volume 1, The Faust or Forced Act. This is by, I believe, Kieran Gillen, Jamie McKelvey, Matthew Wilson and Clayton Cowles. And I had really mixed feelings about this. I was really looking forward to reading this because I flicked through this in foils a couple of months ago, and the art was so beautiful. So I decided to pick it up in Waterstones when I was there, like last month or the month before, in Bath, I think. And the art in this is so gorgeous. I'm going to try and find a really good example where there's not blood, which is kind of difficult. There, like, it has all these gorgeous colours in it, and it's really colourful. I feel like the art style is quite similar to the art style in Saga, so if you like that kind of really colourful art, then I'd recommend this. It's also published by Image, which is what publishes Saga, but the storyline just fell completely flat for me. I really didn't like the story. I felt quite confused going through it, which is not something I like to feel when reading these kind of things. Like, I like to kind of have that understanding unless it's supposed to be a mystery, but this I just kind of felt confused by, and I didn't really think the story was that great, which was a disappointment. So I probably won't be continuing on with these unless I can get them from my library or something, which is disappointing because the art is so lovely, but unfortunately I'm just not going to buy these if I'm not finding the story interesting. And then the next book I read was Waistcoats and Weaponry by Gail Carriger. This is the third book in her Finishing School series, so I'm not going to go really into a synopsis of this other than that I really enjoyed it. It's Gail Carriger, so obviously I was going to enjoy this. This is my last published Gail Carriger book, full-length novel of Gail Carriger's that I had yet to read, so now I have nothing left until the release of Prudence later in March, so I don't know what I'm gonna do with my life, but this was really good. I just love this series. It's not quite as great as The Parasol Protectorate for me, but this book they just kind of slowly keep improving for me, and I did really enjoy this one, and I think Sophronia really developed as a character, and that was really enjoyable, and the books are just gorgeously designed as well, which is something I love about them. And the next book I read was another one in this series, and it's Rebel Angels by Libba Bray. This is the second book in the Gemma Doyle trilogy. It's kind of a paranormal historical fiction. It's set in Victorian England, and it's about this girl called Gemma who goes to a finishing school, or kind of Spence ladies academy, where she discovers that she can enter the realms it's kind of amazing. There's all kind of amazing magic. There's feminist undertones in this series, I kind of like to think, and I really like Gemma as a character. This was, again, a really solid 4 stars, just like the first book was for me. I'm not even sure if this book is ever going to surpass 4 stars for me, but I do really enjoy it, and I do like Libba Bray as an author. I've read The Diviners by her, and I think she's a great author, and these books are really enjoyable, and I love anything set in Victorian England, so this was good. I have been spoiled on the 3rd book though, as I always complain, so I think that does lessen my enjoyment slightly of the series because I know what's going to happen. But still, I enjoyed it. And then I also read The Rhythmatist by Brandon Sanderson, which is the first book in a YA series, I believe. This was published in 2013. I'm not sure when the 2nd book is coming out. I think the release date has been kind of pushed back a number of times, not because this is just because he's had like prioritised other projects before this one. I'm trying to finish all of Brandon Sanderson's books this year. This was so good. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. Oh, Brandon Sanderson is such a great author. The more I read, the more I fall in love with his work. This was a really interesting world. It's kind of like gearpunk is how he describes it. It's kind of like an alternate United States of America, where all like the states are like separated by sea, so they're like the United Isles in this land, like this. And it's kind of like a Victorian kind of late 19th century kind of feel to it, and I really enjoyed this. It was kind of got a murder mystery in it, which I really enjoyed, and the plot twist at the end was amazing. Brandon Sanderson is amazing at plot twists, and this did not kind of lessen that status for me, and I'm just excited to read more of his books this year. And then the next book I read was for school, and it was Hamlet by Shakespeare. This is all very popular. I gave this 4 stars, and that's purely enjoyment level. I just gave this, like, kind of read this as a very, like, a basic kind of reading, because this was it's only the 2nd Shakespeare I've read. And with Shakespeare, I tend to have to study things to really fully understand all the concepts and everything. So I did enjoy this, and yeah, 4 stars. I can't believe I didn't, I think a lot of people grew up knowing how this ends, or like knew the ending, and I didn't really know what happened at the end at all, so I'm not going to spoil it for you guys, because I didn't know, and my friend was really shocked that I didn't know what happened at the end, but that was nice that I didn't know. And yeah, this is such a classic Shakespeare play. I feel like I don't really need to say much more. And the next book I read was a present that I received at Christmas from my lovely friend Alice. This is Paper Aeroplanes by Dawn O'Porter. This is the first book in a duology, and it's about kind of a girl friendship in the 90s in Guernsey, and it's pretty fabulous. And I really liked how this was really, the sole focus of this book is a friendship between 2 girls, and it upsets me how much we never see that in YA. I just think it's shocking, considering how many people who read YA are girls, and obviously will have friends that are girls, and you don't see that. Obviously this is a part of a wider issue of misrepresentation in YA, but I just find it upsetting that you don't get a lot of books that are focused on female friendship. But I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really good. I gave it 4 stars. I did have a couple of kind of issues with it, namely the writing. I just felt like it was really simple, and kind of like middle grade, not a YA, like it wasn't very sophisticated. It was really, really simple, and like that's not a bad thing. I just tend to enjoy writing that's a bit more well constructed than just simple sentences. So this does kind of read like a middle grade, except it's got quite a bit of sexual content in it, which was kind of weirdly juxtaposed, but I still really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to carrying on into the 2nd book. And then the next book I read was a bit of a surprise, and it was Jane by April Lindner, and this is a retelling of Jane Eyre in the 21st century, and I was expecting this to be so cheesy, and it actually wasn't. I gave it a 3.5 stars. I think it was done fairly well. I mean, Jane Eyre is one of my favourite classics of all time, so obviously it wasn't going to surpass it. But I still did enjoy it. I thought Jane as a character, was brought quite well into the 21st century. She's be quite a difficult character to recreate, but I think it was done fairly well in this. And I also thought that Mr. Rochester was done fairly well. Not quite as well done as Jane, but the setting was done quite well, and just the plot was carried forward quite well, and I just enjoyed this. And for pure enjoyment factor, I gave it 3.5, and I think the cover of this is beautiful. I mean, that's completely beside the point, but it is something that should be noted, is that this cover is just gorgeous, and I will love it forever. And then the next book I read was also a really good book, and it is Shadowfell by Juliette Marillier. This is a first book in a trilogy by Juliette Marillier, who's like a really famous women fantasy author, and it's a YA trilogy, and it is kind of has Celtic or Celtic influences, I think. It's basically about fae, and it's about this main character called Nerin, who kind of gets separated from her father at the very beginning of the novel. She has no other family and wants to go on this journey to this kind of prophesized land called Shadowfell, where there is supposedly kind of freedom, because in her kingdom magic is banned. Any contact with fae, or the good folk as they're called in this novel, is banned. And Nerin can actually talk to the good folk, and she wants to go to somewhere where she will have freedom and kind of be part of a rebellion against the king. And it's basically just follows her journey to this kind of prophesized Shadowfell. And I really, really enjoyed this. I loved Nerin as a character. I thought she was a really great character. She went through a really amazing character development. I loved the love kind of interest, or it's really more of the romance, really. He's not just a love interest. I really liked that. It was so well done. It was really slow burning, and I love slow burning romances. Just as in Grave Mercy, the romance is really well done. So if you want a romance that's very like well done and slow burning, I would recommend this book as well. The fantasy elements were done quite well. I mean, the world building was kind of lacking, but for a book this short, I wasn't really expecting it. And I'm definitely getting the second book and the third book soon, so I am hoping that the world building moved more in there, and I am so excited to carry on with the rest of this series, because they left on such a cliffhanger, and I think this series will get better and better, and I gave it 4 stars. I'm just so pleased that I've finally read a Juliette Marillier book. And then the third to last book that I read this month was The Time of My Life by Cecilia Ahern. This is a chick lit book kind of with magical realism. There's not much to say other than it's about this kind of one-dimensional character called Lucy, who basically thinks her life is okay, but then realises she's constantly lying to herself. And she is actually really suffering, and then the magical realism element comes in when her life appears and she's getting letters from her life, who is an actual person, and kind of he wants to turn her life back around and be good again. And I felt a bit mad about this. My friend Alice sent this to me, and I just didn't like it as much as she seemed to, which is a bit of a disappointment, but I don't know, chick lit books are kind of hit or miss for me, and I think I will try some more Cecilia Ahern, because Love, Rosie came out last year, and I think that's based on the Cecilia Ahern book titled Where Rainbows End, and I think I will try reading that. But yeah, this just wasn't for me, and I gave it a 3 stars, although I did read it really quickly. And then I read one classic this month, and that is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I have had this on my TBR for so long, it's ridiculous, and I finally read it. I don't really feel like I need to give much introduction to this. It's basically set during the French Revolution, and kind of before that, and kind of in the lead up to the French Revolution between Paris and London, and it follows 2 men who are in love with the same woman, and I really enjoyed this. Charles Dickens is just a master storyteller, in my opinion. The way that he plots stories and brings things together and just weaves stories is just incredible to me. I didn't enjoy this quite as much as Great Expectations. I think because I kind of didn't love the characters like I did in Great Expectations, or like really enjoy them, but I still did really like the characters. I thought they really make it, like Charles Dickens writes really interesting characters, especially Sydney. I feel like he's a kind of standout character in this book. And I'm so glad I've read this. I'm not sure which Charles Dickens book I'm going to read next, but I definitely will be continuing on to try and chug through all of his many books. And then the last book I finished was on the last day of February, and it is 1,000 Pieces of You by Claudia Gray. This is the first in a sci-fi series, kind of sci-fi time travel book. I really enjoyed this. It's basically about a girl called Marguerite whose parents are amazing physicists and have discovered a way to travel through dimensions, because in there they have kind of discovered that there are multiple dimensions, like thousands upon thousands for eternity, and they've kind of developed this way of travelling through the different dimensions. And right at the beginning of the book, Marguerite's father is murdered by one of their really trusted grad students, and Marguerite and another one of the grad students, Theo, decides to jump after him and try and revenge Marguerite's father's murder or death. And this was really good. I had a couple of things I didn't like about it, which is why I gave it 4 stars, but overall I really love this. I loved the kind of multi-dimension aspect to this book, and I really liked Marguerite as a character. I didn't think she went through amazing character development, but I did feel like she kind of was a nice character to follow. She definitely wasn't some kind of really bland character. She was interesting, she had her interests, the family kind of relationships in this were really strong and interesting to read about, and the dimensions were really the strongest point of this book. The kind of different ones that Claudia Gray created were really interesting, and she kind of did historical aspects as well as futuristic aspects really well equally, which I think is a really good accomplishment for any author. And overall I really enjoyed this, and I am really looking forward to the next book in the series, which comes out later this year. So those are all the books that I read in February. It's kind of a crazy amount, and I am so proud of you if you stuck to the end of this video, because I tried to make it a bit shorter. So hopefully I'll see you all soon for another video. Bye!